Welcome back to another episode of EpicEarth. EpicEarth is a podcast for those curious about the STEM fields and the awesome, quirky, and fun experiences and research taking place right now. If you enjoy listening to stories like these, hit that like, follow, and subscribe button. This is episode number 27. You say tomatoes, and I say climate change? So sit back, relax, and enjoy another ride as we take you on a journey around this epic Earth.
I found it all so fascinating, just learning all the information.
Nobody told me I couldn't do it, and I loved it.
And now I know how to learn. Like, this is a doable thing.
You know, that's an impact that we can't ignore.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of EpicEarth. I am your host, Ashley Bosa, and with me, I have my co-host, who is amazing and fabulous, Brian Rosenblatt.
Hey, everyone. Happy to be here.
And we are super excited today. This is a episode that Brian and I have wanted to do for a very long time. We're kind of ramping it up a little bit. We actually have 3 guests joining us today rather than the usual one. And I am going to have them sort of give you a little bit of background on themselves, but I'd like to introduce Deb Roman. Hi, Deb.
Hi.
Jen Pierce. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
And last but not least, Jenny Wolf. Hi, Jenny.
Hello.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure of ours to have you on our podcast. So Deb, I'm going to start with you. Would you like to give our listeners a little bit of a background about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I work as an integrative family physician in Boise, and I also teach at the local medical school and do some transformational coaching for people. And I'm really involved in a lot of initiatives locally and nationally to address the well-being of physicians and other clinicians and medical students, which has really become a big public health crisis. But as far as today goes, I over the last several years, I've been meeting with educational professionals and medical professionals to talk about how we kind of rekindle our cooperative responsibility for our community health. How do we work together and inspire compassion for each other? And so we've come together and put together a group of people, what we call a movement. It's the Compassionate Communities Healthcare Movement, with the idea that we wanted to start addressing those questions. And one of our first initiatives was to address climate change in the way that it impacts health. And it was called, or is called, Root Down, Reach Out. So this idea of rooting down in your community, reaching out to each other, but also kind of like trees. So rooting down and reaching out. And our hope was that we could really become involved in planting maybe even 1 tree for each person in Idaho. And so some of the people that are working with us, we've made this intergenerational and grassroots. So students from BSU and students from the medical community. And then some of the professors at BSU have also been part of our board to help start looking at this. And recently, we've put together some forums, some healthcare forums where we talk about some of these issues, bring together diverse people to talk about some of these current issues that we're facing in terms of our health. And we've been looking at how we can bring together some of the many groups that we already have in Idaho that are doing such wonderful work to strategically plan how we can move forward over the next 5 to 10 years. So you asked kind of who I am. I'm just going to say that I love to eat chocolate, and I love to laugh, and I love to bring people together to have conversations and learn about all different ideas and different people. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's all so amazing. Thank you, Deb, for sharing. How did you get into the work that you do now? Were you always interested in the medical field, or was it something that you were inspired by another individual?
You know, I was originally going to be a teacher, and then I was going to be a speech therapist. And I worked at a home for abused children. And it was a really powerful experience. And there was this amazing physician there who connected with these children in such a remarkable way, sometimes even without saying anything. And he was really able to, in such a beautiful way, help them to heal. And so I worked there for several weeks, and then I thought, that's what I'm going to do. So I went home and told my parents I'm going to be a physician. And they're like, do you want to think about this a little bit? Maybe just like, should we talk about it? No, that's really what I want to do. And so, that's kind of the individual work. I love being a physician. It's a beautiful, beautiful honor. But in the last 10 or 15 years, I've actually heard from a lot of my colleagues that they're very unhappy, and that there's a lot of stresses that are actually leading to significant levels of depression and burnout and even suicide. And so that's what brought me more into the work that I've done in the medical community. And then several of us talked about, well, how do we bring this kind of idea to our whole community? How do we look at health for the entire community? And that's where we started to develop compassionate communities. We really, wanted to look at what does it take to really restore that feeling that we want to take care of each other. And, very briefly, my grandpa was in the United States. He emigrated to the United States. And during the war, the Second World War, some of his family members called from Russia and said, we're in trouble. Can you come help us? And, he dropped everything. He took all his money. He asked someone to take care of his store. And he went to Europe to bring these people back. And when he got there, he thought it was just going to be 10 people. There were 100 people that asked him to take him across the borders and back to safety. And they did such amazing things. Like they found a giant a railroad car where they could all hide and get across the border safely. They all took care of each other. And I think that's my hope for our community. How do we rekindle that? How do we, help each other get through some of these big things that we're dealing with, like climate change?
That's really beautiful. And I think that the work that you're doing is inspiring, but also very necessary in a society, especially as like ours, where sometimes we lose the point, or we kind of lose track of, this. It's all about community building. We should be helping each other out rather than every man or every woman for themselves. And I'm going to do things my way. And I think that individuality is great, but I also love this idea of banding together and really finding solutions as a community. So keep up the great work, Deb. We're going to come back to you and hear a little bit more about some of the work that you're doing, especially around climate change. But next, I'd like to invite Jenny to tell us a little bit about what it is that she does. So, hi, Jenny.
Hi. Yeah. So I am based out of the Watershed Education Center. This is an education center run by the city of Boise. And it is in a very unconventional location. It is at the water renewal facility. So if you don't know what that is, the water in your house, which I think a lot about how Idahoans are the biggest users of water per individual in our households in the entire country. So as an Idahoan, everyone uses 190 gallons of water a day in their household. And that doesn't just go away, right? That goes down through, of course, our drains, our sewer systems, and a lot of it comes here to the water renewal facility. And it might not be glamorous to think about that water, but in the desert, this is an incredible resource. And it's important that we are obviously cleaning that water before putting it back into the Boise River, but also recycling the resources that are within it. We're able to make compost, different types of compost from your sewage, basically, right? And some of the phosphorus and nitrogen-rich water that's there. So while it seems unusual to have an education center at a place like this, you can start to see the connections between how we live in a city and how we are connected to our natural world, and how it's important to bring those connections to life and really connect people to those resources. So the watershed has historically been a water education center, but we're going through a really exciting time right now. We are transforming into a water and climate science education center. So we're going to be temporarily closed, which is going to be sad, but we're going to be really busy, and we've been really busy designing whole new exhibits about local climate impacts and Idahoans' connections to them and solutions. So we're hoping this can be a place where people can get background on what's changing here in Idaho, but also understand how to connect to people who are working on solutions. So that is currently where I am. My day-to-day job is pretty diverse, ranging from taking first graders to the river to learn about great blue herons. Like every bird they see, first graders are like, that is an eagle. Like, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not. So my day ranges from really trying to impress upon them that even a crow is cool if it's not a bald eagle. To I do educator training. We partner a lot to help make climate education more accessible to teachers. And so they're able to take that into their classroom, because teachers are the best way to amplify information, right? They reach so many more minds than we can during people's visits here. So we work with educators to train them, and we just work a lot to connect with community solutions to climate change, boost work of other organizations, and really just uplift them as places that people can connect to who are looking to act on climate action or looking to see what's going on in the community, because we don't want everyone to feel like they're on their own on this. So that's where I am currently. My path to get here was not a linear one. I started my post-college career working on boats. So I spent a lot of time, about a decade, as a wilderness guide. And I would take people out into Southeast Alaska for week-long trips. And I think I've always been fortunate enough to be really connected to the natural world. I grew up with parents who had the ability and interest in taking me out into Idaho's backcountry. And so when I graduated college, I just wanted to do more of that. So I was lucky enough to find a way to make that my job. And that was when I started really viscerally seeing impacts of climate change. We would spend a lot of time by glaciers, and I watched them over the course of guiding up in Southeast Alaska go, like literally some glaciers stopped being tidewater glaciers just in the short period that I was there. And I remember there's a glacier in Southeast Alaska called Marjorie Glacier. And on the eastern face, when I started guiding, there was this little rock, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And a few years in, it was like half the glacier. So that's a pretty in-your-face way to think about climate change. But at the same time, I was returning to Idaho in the summers and starting to really notice how our fires were starting to change. So while glaciers are, I think, understandably so, kind of like the poster child for aspects of climate change, I also started seeing more and more changes when I would come back to Idaho once or twice a year. And so climate change started to be something that I was really focused on. And kind of just because of my background, for me, a really impactful way to get people to care about science and the natural world is to get them to love it. You take people out hiking for a week, and if they've never been hiking before, they might be, afraid, intimidated by a big forest. By the end of a week, not only are they more comfortable, but they care for it so deeply, right? And then the question pretty naturally becomes like, what can I do to make sure this space continues to be a refuge for people? So that's kind of been my guiding philosophy. I want people to connect with nature and care about it, because I think that if you have this personal connection, you're going to advocate for a place. So from guiding, I went to working at the McCall Outdoor Science School, where I would connect first graders and fourth graders to really big concepts about like changing fire regimes by having them just make observations about what they were seeing in Ponderosa State Park. Um, and once you get people to start looking around them, questions come pretty naturally about, not only what's changing, but what's here. And then people care about it. So for me, that's been a really rewarding and effective way to get people to take action on climate change. And it's kind of been, I guess, the culmination of of my background, from like playing outside and taking other people to play outside to asking questions about how can we make sure this continues to be a place to both recreate, but also, the multitude of other things people do with our resources here in Idaho.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love the idea that you're trying to connect people to nature in order to let them appreciate, and then to also personalize a lot of their experiences with climate change. I love the idea, and I think you are in this really unique position, as well as Deb and Jen, to really have that place-based education where you can say, yeah, we don't live around a lot of glaciers. There used to be glaciers here, but I mean, that's so far removed from what a lot of Idahoans experience now. But to really use this poignant examples like wildfires, and talk about their experiences with wildfires and how it's changed over, even their lifetime, and really target their risk perception, right? Their attitudes, and then and how they're changing their behaviors based off of all of that stuff. So that is awesome. Thank you for sharing. We're going to come back around and learn a little bit more about the watershed and some of the cool educational tools that you guys use to educate the public. But then I would like to now move to Jen, who is one of my favorite people. I get to work with her a lot, and I am fortunate to call her a good friend. So Jen Pierce, you want to tell us a little bit about you and how it is that you interact with climate change?
Thanks so much, Ashley, and it's wonderful to be on EpicEarth with you and Brian. Shout outs to you guys. I just love what you've done with this podcast. And I just learned so much from listening to Deb and Jenny. I didn't know each Idahoan used 190 gallons a day, or each Boisean, which is astounding and disturbing. But then I think the flip side of that is, Jenny's words that then they turn that what could be viewed as a waste product into something like compost that sustains life, and they purify that water and put it back in the river. So thanks for sharing those. So so I'm a professor in the geoscience department at Boise State. I've been at Boise State since 2005. I actually came to Idaho in 2000 as part of my PhD research. I was looking at longer term, so 1,000-year records of wildfires on the South Fork Payette River, which are preserved in little pieces of charcoal. So by digging up that charcoal and putting it in stratigraphic context, and so trying to understand how it was deposited and then dating it, I could reconstruct wildfires back over thousands of years. I always joke with people that I went to school for 12 years after high school to tell you that fires are bigger and more severe when it's warm and dry. And that has been the case not only now, but throughout time. Brian's laughing, but so yeah, that's really what got me interested in climate change, and interested in contributing to climate change was my PhD research. Since then, when I came to Boise State, there were no classes in climate change that were taught at Boise State. So I started teaching climate change classes, and then in collaboration with other faculty and staff, started the climate studies minor at Boise State. And now we have great students in that minor. We have wonderful courses. And so that has really grown. It wasn't really, though, until I had my own kids and saw and experienced what they were or more accurately, what they were not learning in school, that I became engaged in K through 12 climate literacy and education. And I would say, preparing the next generation of Idahoans to meet the challenges of a changing planet is not easy. All these shifts in agricultural production, we've experienced increases in the size and severity of wildfires, impacts of wildfire smoke on our health, reduced water quality, summer heat. So these are big, kind of scary things. But I was struck by how little my kids and other kids were learning about climate change, and that really doesn't help them. We want our kids to have the tools and resources to meet this challenge, and that's what Jenny and the folks at the watershed do, which is fantastic. So in response to that, starting in about 2016, I started leading extensive volunteer outreach and have now interacted with more than 100 K through 12 classrooms, playing greenhouse gas tag, and learning about soils and learning about wildfire. And to not just teach kids about the challenges of climate change, but teach them about solutions to climate change. And I've been so impressed every classroom I go into, and I ask them to draw or describe their climate solution. These kids come up with wonderful ideas. Mm-hmm. And so that's really, really heartening. And I want to do what I can to keep doing that. I formed a group called iClear, the Idaho Climate Literacy Education Engagement and Research Group. And that goal of that group really is to bring together folks in our community like Deb and Jenny to promote the great work they're doing. So I'll stop there.
Amazing. Jen, did you always know that you wanted to go into academia, or was that something you sort of started doing the research, kind of started getting into some aspects of it, and then realized, hey, I really want to teach people about geoscience?
So that's a great question. So I'm actually a third generation geologist, but I never thought I wanted to be a geologist. Even into college, I mean, I'd spent time with my dad out wandering around in the greater Yellowstone area and grew up in Colorado. So I also spent a lot of time outside. And but I did not think I wanted to go into academia. It was one of those things, and I always tell my students when I'm teaching, what you really want to do is just give yourself an opportunity to have lots of doors in front of you that you could walk through. And so I did that, and I did went to college. I did a fellowship after college looking at effects of mining in China and Indonesia and Australia, and learned a lot about myself and about the world. Then I came back and I worked in a coffee shop, and that was wonderful for a while, but I realized that I wanted to keep my brain moving. So I went on to grad school. But no, there was never like a plan. I am going to be a professor. That was never a plan.
Yeah. Funny how that happens. Funny how we just all fall into geology or geoscience, some of us. Well, thanks for sharing, Jen. All three of you have such fascinating stories and such amazing work and knowledge to share with not only our listeners, but with the community and people just around the world. I think this topic it can be a kind of tough topic to talk about. I think there's a lot of stigma around climate change, a lot of misinformation. And so I'm glad that I have the three of you here, because I feel like we can sort of delve into some of that information and sort of hopefully, clear some information up, but also, as Jen and as Deb and Jenny come up with, find solutions to what we can do as individuals in order to help, either build resilience, make, policies sustainable so that they benefit us in the long run, and to really maybe think about long-term effects of climate change and what are the best ways to handle it now in the present. So having said that, I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions, and I try to target these towards each of sort of your expertise. I'm actually going to start with Jen because I'd like to back up a little bit. And for the benefit of our listeners, I'd like to, would you mind just describing what climate change is and what the difference between climate change and global warming is?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so climate change can be just simply defined as long-term changes in weather, right? So changes in precipitation and temperature. And of course, one thing that we learn as geoscientists is that the climate has been changing on Earth for millions of years. And so, but when we're talking about climate change most often recently, so when you hear climate change on the news, et cetera, that's referring to anthropogenic or human-caused climate change. So that's the difference there. Also, the time period over which you define it, is changes. So 60 years is often used in a definition between changes in weather, shorter term, or changes in climate. But as geoscientists, oftentimes we're talking thousands to millions of years, right? When we're talking about climate change. So back to this question of anthropogenic climate change, or human-caused climate change. Human-caused climate change is exactly as it sounds, changes in climate due to human activity, and specifically due to addition of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So greenhouse gases warm the planet. And if we had no greenhouse gases at all, the average temperature on Earth would be about 50 degrees Fahrenheit colder than it is now and uninhabitable, kind of like Mars. So we need some greenhouse gases to survive, but what's happened by burning fossil fuels is we've added a lot of extra carbon dioxide in particular into our atmosphere. As I teach the kiddos with greenhouse gas tag, greenhouse gases trap heat. So that's what they do. They trap heat. They let sunlight through, but they do not let heat out. And that is what warms the planet. So, difference between climate change and global warming. So when NASA has measured the temperature of our planet, on average, the average temperature of the planet is increasing. So that is global warming. And that's very well documented. Climate change is more all-encompassing. So climate change then would include the effects of that overall average global warming on changes in precipitation, changes in snowmelt, windiness, all those other parts of our climate that are much larger than just global warming.
Yeah, thank you for that description. And without getting too political, often the argument is, oh, global warming can't be happening because it's snowing 8 feet outside, or this place is actually really a lot colder than it used to be. And so can you just talk a little bit to how maybe climate change is affecting areas around the planet differently, but how we're still getting an overall planet global warming?
Yeah, so if it's snowing outside, that's weather. And so that's the shortest definition. And of course, this is not some linear increase in temperature day by day and year by year, because the Earth is so complex, which is a wonderful, beautiful, complicated thing, right? So that, yes, a manifestation of overall global increases in temperature can be that some parts of the globe are cooler and snowier, et cetera, than maybe people remember. And so that's what causes, I think, some confusion. But yeah, overall, it's very well shown through many, many, many scientific studies that the overall temperature of the Earth is increasing.
Great, thank you. I'd like to jump to Jenny now. And okay, so we know from Jen's explanation that we're having climate change across the globe. But, often we talk about, well, what is my risk perception? How does it affect me? Because people like to, know how it's impacting them. So, how specifically, I think you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but how is climate change affecting us right here in Idaho and really across the Western US, but specifically in Idaho?
Yeah. So when I think of climate impacts in Idaho, my mind goes right to water. And the city of Boise did a climate adaptation assessment, and this was an ongoing study just like on this question of how will climate change most impact Idaho. And it was 3/4 of the impacts are tied to water. So um, one of the big ones is changes in our snow accumulation. So, what we're starting to see throughout Idaho is decreased snowpack. And when you think about decreased snowpack, that is not just something that impacts mountains where a lot of our snow accumulates. The Boise River, for example, right here in the valley, is mostly snowmelt, 90% snowmelt. So without snow, we don't have a Boise River, which is the backbone of our city. So in addition, the snow accumulation changes are a bit counterintuitive because on one hand, what we're seeing is that we're getting more precipitation. So in the winter months, if we have warmer temperatures, then our precipitation might not fall as snow. It might fall on rain. And when you get rain on snow events, that melts the snow rapidly, which can lead to an increase in flooding. So there's kind of this counterintuitive, like, wait, we're not getting enough precipitation yet. We're also talking about increased flooding. So then another thing to think about is when we change how our snow falls, we change when that water is delivered. So we might see flooding, and with that, water available for irrigation happening at very different times of the year. Farmers and our plants are cued to have water with the spring runoff, but we're seeing melting occurring earlier. We're seeing that snow, therefore, it doesn't stay up in our mountains. That contributes to drier forests, which then you see what comes up a lot in climate change discussions, which is feedback loops, right? You have less snow, which leads to drier forests, which leads to increased fires. And that all really comes back to water. So we're changing our timing, we're changing the amount of snow. And then in addition to filling up our rivers, that snowmelt also fills up our reservoirs. So we're seeing increased drought frequency. I do understand when people have a bit of confusion. When there's a big snow year and a big flood, people don't think about drought as immediately, but our trends are that we're seeing quite a lot more drought frequency. And it's interesting because you'll talk to Idahoans and they will remember like this year's a big snow year, but oh yeah, last year, like the Lucky Peak docks weren't floating until very scary late in the year. And then they'll remember like, oh yeah, we had that snow event like near Mother's Day, and that's what really helped us out. But Lucky Peak Reservoir was pretty low last year. And so we are seeing increases in the frequency that we're getting drought. And then I would say those are the big ones that I think about. Each of those have ripple effects that go out into the community. But when you think about changing water availability and decreased snowmelt and drier forests, I think you've captured the main ones that Idahoans feel, especially during their summertime days.
Yeah, I agree. Having grown up in the Western US, it's definitely, even since I was a young kid, 30 years or so ago, it's definitely changed. The environment has definitely changed. It does feel much drier. When I was growing up, we would see snow in southern Colorado all the way all year round except for in July. So now we maybe are lucky if we get to see snow 6 months out of the year. So yeah, huge difference. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's really poignant again to really make it, personal for a lot of people and to hear about their experiences. So yeah, so sometimes there's this bit of disconnect between, flooding and, oh yeah, we're in a drought, but there's tons of water around, and why is that happening? We also see that disconnect between, oh, there's global warming, but it's snowing outside and it's really cold. So how can that be true? And another disconnect, I think, for a lot of people is how our health is actually impacted by climate change. I feel like this is especially something that's come much more to light in the wake of the pandemic, because we've all experienced that. It's really now researchers' turns to sort of discuss and talk about, well, I mean, this is just the beginning of some of these pandemics that we're likely to see. So, but someone who's much better versed in that and more professional, I would like to get Deb's opinion. So, Deb, how is climate change really affecting our health overall?
Yeah, as Jen and Jenny said, that the increase in wildfires, the increase in flooding, the increase in droughts, the increase in temperature, they all have dramatic effects on our health. The wildfires put particulates into the air that are inhaled, that can lead to exacerbation of heart and lung disease, significant exacerbation of those. People are exposed with the warming temperature of the lakes. They're exposed to different kinds of bacteria or viruses that could be causing infectious diseases. As we get the droughts, we have the dust, and we can have some spores that come from the dust storms and things like that. And some of these things can get into our homes, right? So it's not just that you have to go outside, but we're inhaling these things in our homes as well. Certainly, as we saw in the West, just the increased temperature, people that are vulnerable populations like children and older adults or immunocompromised, those elevated temperatures, they don't have much capacity to compensate for that. So it's very significant. And, when you have something that's, for instance, the wildfires, where it's inflammatory like that, any other illness can be affected as well, because you're increasing the inflammatory load in the body. And so people that have other illnesses will see exacerbations of them. It's very significant on a lot of levels and affecting all different populations of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing to really show that connection. I think a lot of people sometimes don't make that connection, but saying, hey, have you noticed how your health has changed, in the last 10 years, because these wildfires are, fire season is increasing. I noticed just with my allergies sometimes that, my allergies are coming a lot sooner, and, it lasts a lot longer. So yeah, there's definitely, some of these impacts are subtle, but I think they can have a significant impact on a lot of people. How do you feel? Do you know how climate change likely will impact populations in the future? So we're already sort of kind of at capacity here on Earth in terms of human population, but with trends, that's likely to still grow quite a significant amount. So how will that climate change likely affect the larger growing populations that we'll have here on the planet? Do you think, in your opinion?
In terms of health?
Yeah.
Yeah. My hope is, with the work that all these different people are doing, that we're going to make a dent in this, and we're going to mitigate some of the effects. But if we go along the course we're going now, and we tend to have more extreme events and more fires and more droughts and more floods, and we're just going to be accelerating the exposure that people have. My concern as a physician is that, if more and more people are getting ill, then our communities can't flourish. We really, there's a tremendous impact when a lot of people are ill. There's economic consequences. There's consequences in terms of just connecting with other people. People are stressed, and stress itself leads to more illness. So in so many ways, if we decrease the health of our communities, it affects everyone in the community, even if they feel like they're healthy. But I do hope that, the education, I think the piece that Jen and Jenny have been talking about, this idea of educating people about this, with patients, similarly, sometimes you can just be saying to someone, do you notice that your allergies are happening more often? Do you notice that you need more of your inhaler for your daughter? How do you feel when the smoke is doing, how is that affecting your lung disease? And as people become more aware, then, like Jenny said, they start asking questions and they start thinking about solutions and coming together to work on that together. Yeah. I'm very curious to hear what everyone else says. I mean, that's just from a health impact, but I think it can be significant. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to lead into that. Great. Thanks for segueing for me, Deb. But yeah, I know, Jen does a lot of work with local farmers for carbon sequestration techniques and other groups. And Jenny, having worked in sort of the education sector, I mean, how are populations, that are impacted first and foremost by the climate change, so the most obvious climate change in areas where there's a lot of drought and we can no longer, farm off those lands, or, the water table is so low that our groundwater tables have almost disappeared. How is that going to impact our populations? Jen, do you want to start first?
Sure. Yeah. Well, a couple of things really have come to mind here in this discussion and in response to Deb's question. One of them is from Katharine Hayhoe, and of course, as she's one of the leading climate communicators in our world, and her book "Saving Us" really articulates that one of the best things we can do about climate change is talk about it, which is what this podcast is doing, is what we're doing. And at the same time, the people who might be listening to this podcast, who might have tuned in already, they are already concerned about climate change. And so then talking about the impacts and the adverse impacts of climate change to people who are already worried sometimes doesn't help, because they're already worried. So really the key to that is to say, yes, this is something we should all be worried about. Your worry, your concern is bona fide and legitimate. So taking that and then saying, and the best thing you can do to alleviate some of that worry is to take action. And what I recently heard in one of Katharine Hayhoe's talk is one way to identify your climate action is to really look at that overlap between what you are good at and your natural connections. So like, for using Deb as an example, she is a good physician and she understands the human body and how it works. She's got those connections in the medical community. So find out what you're good at and your connections. Find out what needs doing. So what do you really want to focus on? And then finally, what brings you joy? And this is really where I think we can allow the earth that we are trying to protect and serve, let it serve us back. So then take those moments out on the Boise River to enjoy seeing that great blue heron, and to let our planet give back. Anyway, I can't actually remember what your question was.
Totally fine. I was going to ask about future populations and how they'll be impacted by climate change. I think this is all valid, though. I'm glad that you brought these points up, because it isn't all doom and gloom. It gets exploited as that often, and yes, we are headed in a particularly not great direction with climate change, but to empower ourselves to find that self-efficacy, to actually take actions, I think is so important. Jen, you hit a really great point. I don't know if you want to answer the question about future populations, but
Well, okay, so yeah, so I think future populations, and again, this is what I'm focused on is, my kids. First, we got to give them the tools and training to understand what climate change is and some solutions to that. I'd say the best way to think about future generations and future solutions is to focus on, for example, in Idaho, we have no coal. We do not have any coal. Instead, we have all other renewables. We have solar, wind, geothermal. We've got hydro. And so thinking about, okay, how can we do this differently? How can we do this better? And every classroom I go into, I always tell the kids, I'm like, hey, if you can invent a new way to store energy, I'll give you $1,000. And they're all like, woo, really $1,000? And I say, well, if you really do this, you're going to get a patent for millions of dollars because we really need better ways to store energy, just as one example. So I think moving forward, future generations, really imagining, all of us imagining that addressing climate change could be beautiful. This could result in cleaner air, more connected communities, more intact ecosystems. So imagine that, everyone. Don't imagine, oh, I don't get to drive my car as much. Imagine the good parts. So let's focus on the good parts and know that most people are with you. We also have this misconception that most people don't care about climate change. That's not true. There's been recent studies published in Nature that show that most Americans are indeed quite concerned about climate change and want to do something about it. So remember, you're not alone.
awesome. I love that. Jenny, do you have anything to add or talk about, what populations might struggle with or be empowered by in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I guess something that I think, I don't want to bring us back into that doom and gloom spot, but I do think that it's important to acknowledge too that, climate change, it's a threat multiplier. That's one way that I've heard it described. So Deb touched on this too, but populations that are vulnerable are the ones most at risk to things like heat stress days, or where when power goes out in grids, who can afford to have a generator. These are important conversations to think about because I don't think that's a future that we want. Because also, to bring it back to what Jen says, you should imagine a more caring and a more beautiful future where people who are already at risk aren't the ones that are immediately going to be taking the brunt of these impacts. But I do also think it's important to have that at the forefront of your mind of like who do we need to make sure is being lifted up and being brought into these climate solutions. We want to make sure that they are there for everyone. But I love reframing it as envisioning a different future. And I see people yearning for this. I see when the weather gets nice out, you see people using the green belt like crazy. People want to use that form of cleaner transportation. I think people are excited by things like the different sorts of energy sources that are available to us beyond fossil fuels. I was having a conversation with one of our geothermal program managers today, an amazing guy named John Gunnarsson, who was talking to me about heat pumps because I was trying to get some science on heat pumps straight. And he was talking about the heat that comes off of sewage in parts of Canada. They're using that to power heat pumps. And I was like, maybe I'm a nerd, but that is so exciting to me. Or like the heat coming off of data centers. I think people look at a future and they think that they think about the loss. They're like Jen said, I don't want to have to stop driving my car, but it's like, no, we could have data centers still and use the heat generated on them to make something better. We are still going to have our cities. Let's make them better for us. Let's make them work for us and be places that are pleasant to navigate instead of just heat islands. Let's envision something positive. And these solutions aren't far-fetched. You don't have to look to science fiction to find them. The solutions are popping up everywhere. And so something that I think about for, you know, emerging generations in the future is that you're going to be able to find a connection to a climate solution in whatever you do. It's not just scientists, though their role is invaluable. Everywhere is going to have exciting and different ways of navigating our world. Um, I work really closely with a group, the Mayor's Youth Climate Action Council, and every year they have a climate solution that they work on and a project that they choose. And it was interesting this year, they partnered with our planning and zoning department. So you might, I mean, I think people are starting to wise up to the important role that planning and zoning have as a climate solution in cities. But it's been this amazing process of watching the council take on parking lots in Boise. They're like, something like 14% of our land use in Boise goes to parking lots. Parking lots are 125 degrees in the summer. And so their project has been, let's envision a parking lot if it was something else. So they are building furniture out of salvaged cardboard and got donations for plants. And they've been thinking about the art and the community space that a parking lot could be instead. And this is we've spent almost no money on it, right? Because it's important to us that this is replicable. But imagine if we put just a little bit of resources towards like a solution like that. And imagine how our cities could be different. And it's fun and beautiful and exciting. And they have started doing mock-ups of the parking lot at public events, and people will come over to the parking lot and be like, what's happening here? Like the alternative of it not being a parking lot is beautiful and exciting. And I think that's a microcosm for how we can look at climate solutions for the future. Is this isn't loss. This is also really exciting, and we should make sure that everyone is uplifted as we look toward different solutions.
Yeah, I love that. And as you and Jen and Deb were talking, sort of the wheels were spinning in my head, and I was thinking, I just moved to this area in Meridian, and it's kind of all new builds. It's all townhomes and apartments and all these large complexes that barely have any greenery around them except a couple of trees and maybe a patch of grass. But something I've noticed while living here is that there are actually no green spaces. There's not a park within probably 3 miles of where I live. And it's so depressing to me because I'm just like, where do I go walk? Where do I, go and kind of get away from the urban sort of setting that I have to deal with on a daily basis? And just, okay, well, what would I do? I mean, even at a local level, that would be as simple as maybe going to the city or to my local representative and being like, hey, let's petition for more green spaces in West Meridian. And that is something, you're not having to tackle climate change across the globe, right? That is something that you can realistically do in your own community to help sort of, imagine those much nicer, better places in which we do want to see that greenery. We do want to take walks. We do, not want to spend as much time in our cars in the summer because it's 110 degrees outside. So yeah, awesome. I love all the ideas and the positive outlooks here from the three of you on how future populations will look. Let's see. Jenny, I'd like to sort of ask you, how can educators, we talk a lot about how teachers are an important aspect. Obviously, educators like yourself and Jen and Deb are also important in providing effective information to the general public. So in what ways do you think as educators, can we be the most effective when we discuss climate change with people? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So many. First of all, I pulled up like one of my favorite recent studies I've been reading, and I'm happy to drop this in the chat or for resources. But there was some research done by the Brookings Institute that shows if 16% of high school students in middle income countries were to receive climate change education, we could see a nearly 19 gigaton reduction of carbon dioxide by 2050.
Wow.
So like the social aspects of climate solutions, I think, are really important to think about. because when people are educated, they'll come up with creative solutions, and that's how we're going to see these positive futures. And when when they have a connection to a subject, they're going to go into protecting it or learning about it. And every job is a climate job. Kind of to go back to an earlier point, like there are climate connections everywhere. So if you teach students about the science, they are going to connect to it and find their niche in important and unexpected ways. So just the social aspect of climate solutions are huge. And then as far as how I think it's best for educators to teach about climate change, I'm a big proponent in local place-based climate education. I grew up, I think I was like among the first high schoolers to get regular climate change education. And the way I learned about it was polar bears and rainforests, and rainforests are vital carbon sinks, and polar bears are amazing animals, right? But I think what that gave me was an intense sense of climate anxiety as a teenager, because I had to like hold space for these ecosystems far away that I had never even been to. And like suddenly they were in my brain as like something I needed to be very concerned about. And I don't think people can hold space for every ecosystem and every species all at once. But you can hold a lot of space and a lot of concern and a lot of action toward the ecosystems that you know and understand and the environment around you. So local climate education, I think number one, keeps it from being overwhelming. And number two, you can connect to someone who is working on that solution right in your backyard. So local, place-based, if knowledge is relevant to students, it's going to stick better anyways. So teach them about what they're seeing in their backyard, and they're going to see it in their backyard again and again and get to know it deeper and understand it better. So I think that's big. And then I think we've all really covered really well just the importance of hope-based education. I think it's important not to contribute to climate anxiety. At the same time, I've found that it's important to let students have space for all the emotions they may be feeling around climate change. I think it's disingenuous if students are learning about something big and scary and disastrous. I think it's disingenuous to just say like, well, it's going to be okay. I don't think that's necessarily 100% accurate or fair. So I think it's okay to let students sit with discomfort and fear, and you don't have to 100% try to turn that around and let them work through it. Connect them to resources, but don't just blindly say like, no, everything's okay. So I think that's important. Another rule that I teach is no disaster before fourth grade. So I think you can teach a third and a fourth grader about forest ecology. You can teach them about why fire is important, especially if they're in a place that's seeing burn scars. They're going to have questions about that. They might say, oh, like wildfire is bad, it's scary. You can go ahead, agree with them. Like it is bad, it is scary, it is important for our ecosystem. And you can teach them those things, but I don't think you need to launch into like how many people are being displaced by flooding, and how, those really big disasters, I don't think are important to teach until students are much older. So give them that connection first, let them grow into that connection. If part of that is fear and concern, that's okay. And help them scale it to what they see around them and what they can connect to around them.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think sometimes giving them the knowledge about something also sort of mitigates some of that fear as well. It's something I talk to a lot. I mean, my topic on volcanoes is pretty abstract for most Idahoans, but they love them. But I often hear from young kids, I'm really afraid of volcanoes and they scare me. So, parents will often say, well, we've been reading a lot of books about them. And I say, that's the best thing that you can do. I was afraid of volcanoes, but as soon as I started studying them and learning more about them, they actually became just this really awesome, cool process that occurs on Earth, and I can understand them better. And so I felt more, again, empowered and my self-efficacy of, okay, if I'm around a volcano, what am I going to do? What are some actions I can take? How do I know, what's happening? Of course, at my level, we know a lot of what's happening, maybe at a fourth grade level, not as much, but yeah, I do think knowledge is really empowering in that aspect as well. Deb, do you have any advice on how we can best and most effectively educate others on climate change?
I would say that one of the things that comes up for me as you guys are talking is this idea of really recognizing that anxiety. I agree with you, Jenny, and being able to say, how do we navigate that? How do we resource ourselves? And so one of the things that I'll often share with people from a neuroscientific perspective is that there's a difference between, empathy, where you're looking at something that's very disturbing and you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. You're feeling the pain of that polar bear that's on that lone little piece of ice, right? And it actually activates the pain centers in the brain. Whereas when you do something where you make a connection, as you guys have both talked about, this idea of making a connection with the earth, making connection with people, then you start activating caregiving centers, and you start to feel that you want to do something to alleviate that suffering. Well, that's what compassion is. Compassion, one of my teachers says, compassion is a verb. It's something you do. And what it does is it activates your motor centers, it activates your caregiving centers, it activates your pleasure centers. So it actually resources you. So I think that when we're dealing with people that are looking at such existential crises that we have in front of us, right? It's important to educate, but it's also, I think, important to help them develop the skills to be able to navigate it. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's one of the ways that I often will do that. I teach a mnemonic that people can use to be able to walk themselves from empathy to compassion. And so then they feel better. Then they've done something to do something about it, and they feel like they're engaged and they've made connections so they're not alone. And then we do it together. So, yeah.
Yeah, compassion. I love it. That's like the new slogan for EpicEarth, compassion through STEM education. Jen, do you have anything to add?
I really want to learn Deb's mnemonic. That sounds really cool. I would just add again something that I heard Katharine Hayhoe say, which really resonated and ties back to what Jenny said about not saying, oh, the climate's changing, but everything's going to be okay. That's not really fair to folks. And so what Katharine Hayhoe said was, we're hoping that we can find solutions. We're really hoping that we can figure this out. And she said, hope by definition means it's not a sure thing. You don't, her example was, you don't hope that you can make rent if you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in your bank account. Like, you know that you can pay your rent. But so hope is the accurate term in that, yes, this is something we all need to really work on and work towards. And we need to be hopeful about it, because the other alternative is not okay. But it also means it's not a sure thing. So somehow conveying that. I also really like Jenny's example, and Ashley, what you were saying too about place-based learning, that it is overwhelming to think, okay, you need to, Brian, I'm going to pick on Brian because he's been listening so well to us. You need to go save the planet, Brian. I mean, that's a lot, right? And also for little kids, what do you think? Can you do it, Brian?
Go save the world.
Yeah.
It's one of my goals, I guess. Let's see. One piece at a time, though. That's the point.
Exactly. One Epic Earth podcast at a time, because that's your form of climate action, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So exactly. So yeah, to give everyone something that they can do that ideally is a place or a skill that that optimizes their contribution. So
Nice. Yeah. I love all of this. This is really amazing information and advice on how to educate people. But also, right, Jen, you mentioned before, just show up and have those conversations. It can be really difficult to have that, especially with some family members who maybe are on the other side of the spectrum, but we can definitely still have those conversations and show that compassion for maybe, you know, where people are coming from in terms of their knowledge or their experience with climate change, and then educate them through that place-based sort of model, or have them educate us, right, about their experiences and how that's impacting them. I think the biggest thing, right, besides compassion, is just listening and being open to how people are receiving information and how they're receiving the impacts of climate change as well. And yeah, I'm just going to throw out some buzzwords because it's at the front of my mind right now. But, you know, also reducing the confusion around climate change, right? Because confusion leads to inaction, inaction leads to stalling, and stalling eventually leads to disaster and tragedy. So really being able to hone in on the information that we're providing to people and make sure that it's, you know, there's nothing like, oh, global warming's happening, but it's snowing outside, and really trying to mitigate some of that confusion around the topic. So, and the three of you are doing such an amazing job. So I am so grateful to the three of you, because I think you're just, you know, you're soldiers in our science-based sort of research-oriented fight to just make the world a much better place. So thank you for stepping up and for taking those actions.
I have to say,
go ahead.
I've been a fly on the wall mostly, but yeah, overall, I'm like pretty hyped about what climate change could become. I haven't thought about the beauty of the community and whatnot. And I mean, overall, climate change is a huge issue. On an individual level, it can be overlooked easily. And it's gonna, in order to like resolve some of these things, it's gonna require that we like work together as a big community, which like maybe this is the answer to climate change is a positive feedback loop as opposed to some negative feedback loop. But yeah, overall, this has been a great conversation. I have a list of true or false climate change questions, kind of funny ones. I was wondering if we'd be willing to go through them, and whoever wants to answer them could answer them. Cool.
Nice.
Okay, so the first one, climate change is causing the Earth's axis to tilt more. True or false? A lot of falses.
I'm gonna go with false on that.
Good. Okay, easy one to start. Climate change is causing the world's oceans to turn more green. True or false?
Ooh, that's a tough one because we do a demonstration with that, don't we, Jen?
Well, and there are there have been more algal blooms, so that and that might be true. I don't know. What do you think, Deb and Jenny?
That's kind of where my mind went, right? Like I was like, well, cyanobacteria is red, but like the eutrophication that we get is green. I'm not going to play oceanographer, but the water I know sure turns green when it gets warmer and more concentrated nutrients in it.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, true's right. Good. Third one here.
Between the three of us, we can do this.
Yeah, hoping for a perfect record here. 4 questions total. So Third one, climate change is causing the Earth's magnetic field to weaken. Might be a hard one.
I don't think so. What do you guys?
False. I go with false.
Yeah, I go with false too.
Okay, so this one actually says true. It says some studies are suggesting that the Earth's magnetic field is weakening due to the movement of molten iron in the planet's core, which may be influenced by climate change. So these are
I'm
all
going to have to do more research on
Yeah.
that.
You're not buying it.
preliminary.
That's really interesting, Brian. I've actually not heard that, but now I'm definitely I'll go ask Chat GPT what it thinks.
Oh, yeah.
These questions came right from ChatGPT, so
Oh no.
that's the source of these answers. Okay, this one may be more for Deb. True or false, climate change is causing an increase in the spread of malaria.
I think I did read that. I think I read that to be true.
Yeah, they're saying true. As temperature rises, the range of mosquitoes areas are increasing. So yeah. Cool. Good work.
Nice. Ding, ding, ding. You're all winners. Those are awesome.
It was rocking.
Yeah.
This is great. I've always wanted to be on a Wait, Don't Tell Me. So I feel like, I got a little bit of that.
Gonna turn this into a whole Jeopardy episode or something.
Yeah. That'd be fun. Invite old guests, have a Jeopardy showdown. So normally Brian and I do a lot of fun segments throughout our Epic Earth podcast, and I was trying to think of a way that we could use all three of you in sort of a fun way. So I came up with a question that I'm going to put you all into different roles. So Jen, your role will be as a politician, because I know that you love politicians so much. Deb, your role will be as a distinguished educator at a very prestigious university. So Harvard, Yale, wherever you want to go. And then Jenny, your role will be as a successful potato farmer, but whose crops have not been as bountiful and seem to be smaller and smaller every year. So here's the scenario. Imagine you were trying to combat the impacts of climate change because the Galactic Federation, which is an interstellar republic composed of intelligent beings brought together to serve common interests, is very upset with Earthlings over our disrespect for the incredible planet created by the universe for us. How would each of you contribute to the discussion and subsequent policies put in place to help foster a healthier environment for all living species? And what actions could each of you take personally to help mitigate the effects of climate change locally? Woo! Okay, big scenario. We don't expect, these very, like very in-depth responses, but just do your best. So, who would like to start? Let's see. Maybe Jen, why don't you start as a politician? What would be the things that you would do?
Well, as a politician, vote for Jen 2024. I would say that, of course, protecting our planet and the next generation is at the forefront of my responsibilities. So not only because I want to get reelected, but because I, want the world to be a better place, I'm going to put policies in place that will help support climate solutions. And I think, using Idaho as an example, there are thousands of jobs in clean energy in Idaho alone that will be high-paying, wonderful jobs for the next generation of Idahoans. So I want to support those jobs on the landscape. Idaho has been blessed with abundant clean water and beautiful landscapes that millions of dollars of recreation come into our state every year that we want to support. So there are many economic reasons, not just environmental reasons, that we would want to do the right thing.
You've got my
We're
vote.
voting for you.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Go for Jen 2024.
So Deb.
Oh my
given
goodness,
Jen's
that's so
response.
funny.
How would you, as a distinguished educator, deal with this climate crisis that we're having?
Well, I think we've talked a lot about how to work with education, but I think the piece that stands out for me the most is I would want to invite all different people to come to the table. First, I would invite the Galactic Federation for sure, because they seem to understand this better than I do. And so they are going to have great ideas. They're all welcome. Maybe the table is up in the sky somewhere, who knows? But we'll bringing people together, definitely with good food, good chocolate, lots of delicious food for everyone to enjoy. And, seeking some ways for us to find some common ground. I think those relationships are the foundation for everything we'll do. So to me, one of my teachers, who does a lot of work around the world, conflict resolution, he talked a lot about when there are crises, you bring people together, a small group of people that find what's going on intolerable, but you don't ask them what they want to do. You ask them who they know, who they have a relationship with, who they can invite to the table. And that's what I think I would want to do if I could convince my distinguished university to do this, is to, can we create those spaces where we ask each other, who do you know? Not with opinions that necessarily agree with us, but with opinions that they have, that we all need to learn from. So we can all look at our own biases and look at, what's holding us back, perhaps even, and find some common ground and move forward together.
Love that. I can see why they hired you at this very prestigious university.
Well, I'm not so sure.
No, that was an amazing answer. And last but not least, Jenny, how would you tackle this, and what discussions would you bring to Deb's table?
Yeah, I think I would go to Deb's university and say, let me do a lecture, a guest spot, because farmers are incredible resources for understanding when something is changing. Like if you want to understand climate patterns, talk to a gardener or a farmer, because they can tell you exactly how water supply is changing and how that moves up the chain, like economically and for their plants. So I would be asking to lead a lecture about how my potatoes are changing. I think I might also make her look at my crops. Do I have enough water? If not, maybe I'm gonna start thinking about pivoting to different types of farming. And also it says I'm a very successful potato farmer, so maybe it's time to retire and hand over this land to some regenerative agricultural farms, if that's not what I'm doing. Maybe some small farmers can move in, have more crops there that they're bringing to market. Maybe I'm comfortable. I've had my day in the sun as a potato farmer. So yeah, but in all honesty, like farmers are so important, and they are adjusting in incredible ways. Like farmers are changing what they grow, when they grow, how they grow it. They feel it first and they adapt fast. So it's important to listen to them. So Deb, make me a guest lecturer at your university.
You're in, and we're all voting for Jen. It's all good.
Perfect. And I, in my listening tour of farmers in Idaho, have two pearls of wisdom to pass on from them. One, God gave us one mouth and two ears for a reason, which I love, to remind us to listen more than we speak. And the other one, from a farmer, he was I guess actually a rancher, fourth generation rancher, who is doing regenerative agriculture. He's tripled his yields on the same amount of land. Just absolutely amazing. And his one of the things he said was, you have to believe it to see it, which I think applies both to transformations in the agricultural industry and to climate change. So anyway.
Well, official representative for the Galactic Federation. He's elected to allow Earth to try to solve its own problem before we step in. So
Before, yeah, we take our laser and just end it all for you. Just kidding. Awesome. Yes, that was such a fun little activity, I feel like. And it's always right when we think about, okay, that empathy part, but also that compassion part and putting ourselves in other people's shoes to take on a different role and say, well, how would I do it differently? How would I do it the same? What am I up against, right? Like, Jen, you might have some hard, tough people who are like, nope, we don't care. You can spend 12 hours and, Senate session and whatever. We're definitely not voting on that sort of amendment or agenda to climate policy. But, it's coming with that understanding that, okay, what are the best ways to sort of tackle this? And sometimes it's not from the top down, even though we're voting in these politicians and these people who do make, climate change policies and really have a big impact on carbon emissions and our carbon footprint and all the stuff that's sort of impacting climate change, our health, healthcare, access to healthcare, all of that. Sometimes we have that climate anxiety or that anxiety just from thinking about there's this one person at the top who's making a lot of decisions for a lot of people. So top-down approach isn't always the best, right? Sometimes the bottom-up approach is really good. And taking that example that Jenny gave us with the local farmer, being asked to be invited to, these roundtable discussions about climate change, and then her whole discussion about if you want to know what's happening, ask a gardener or a farmer. And I think that's just brilliant is, yeah, we see to believe, and what we're seeing is that we believe XYZ is happening, and this is why we think that. And I think it's great. Those are all really brilliant answers. Well, I'm going to wrap up this amazing chat and this interview. I could honestly probably talk to all three of you for the next 3 days, but I'm not so sure that Brian really wants to keep recording for 3 days straight. And also I'm heading to Mexico tomorrow, so I also don't want to record for 3 days. But I just want to thank each and every one of you for coming on the podcast, for sharing your knowledge and all the wonderful information that all of you have, and just sharing your experience with our audience and our listeners, and with Brian and I. It's a really important topic, and I feel like the more information we can put out there, the more people will feel empowered and want to do something about it. So thank you.
Ashley, I had a quote that I could share with you for just a minute.
Yes, please do.
So this is from this wonderful woman who I've heard speak, who does a lot of climate activism around the world. And her name is hard for me to pronounce, but it's Dikala Chankaupa, I think is how you say it. And she's so vibrant and has done so many fun things. And she says, the power in embracing interdependence in the work we do as a collective is that we automatically lean into inclusivity, into compassion, and into diversity as strengths rather than weaknesses. We stop the othering. By doing so, we follow the example of the greatest strategic designer and community builder alive, nature herself.
Wow, that's a beautiful quote. Thank you so much. I can't even think of a better way to wrap up this interview. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jenny. If anyone would like to have more information about climate change or the effects of climate change, feel free to reach out to Brian or I on our website or at our emails. And we can also just put you in contact with these three wonderful women who know a lot more than Brian and I do. But thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you
Thank
so much, Ashley
you.
and Brian. This was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Totally great.
Thanks.
Well, that was an epic conversation.
We'd like to thank all of our listeners.
Tune in next time for another Epic Earth podcast.
I think this is such an important I think this is such an important discussion, and he agrees 100%. Hold on, I'm gonna walk you downstairs.
Oh, you're muted, or I can't hear you.